Good morning, everyone. We're going to talk a bit about God and sex today. And it's a tricky topic because sex causes so much emotion. And it's those tricky topics that cause emotion which often create situations where people vent their emotion, their confusion, and their fear in argumentative or judgmental ways. And that often shows up in the church in terms of debating what God thinks about gay people. And I'm always amazed how much effort people will go through to try to prove that people with minority sexual orientations, lesbians, gays, the LGBTQ, all that, are unloved by God. And in doing so, they break a far bigger commandment, which is to not judge. There's one little corrective I would like to make. I'm wondering where I put my glasses. They've disappeared. I have to fly without them. That there's a kind of accepted idea that the Bible as a whole has a lot of anti-homosexual language. But what you'll hear both sides, pro-gay, anti-gay, people say is that Jesus was silent on the topic. And then some will say, not so, because Jesus said, for this reason, a man and a man leaves his family, a woman leaves her family, and they become one flesh. And by saying that, he's saying that the only sexuality that's acceptable is between a man and a woman in the situation of marriage. And it's interesting because that one mention is in Matthew 19. And in the same Matthew 19, he goes on to say he talks about eunuchs, which is a word that actually comes from guards of bedrooms, because men could guard the bedrooms in which women slept if they weren't interested in being sexual or sensual with women. And Jesus says in Matthew 19, verse 12, for there are eunuchs, let me start the verse before. Yes. For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others, and there are eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let anyone accept this who can. Wow. And it's funny, this passage is never, it's not in the 156-week lectionary of the Revised Common Lectionary of the Episcopal Church, so you don't hear it in the pulpit ever. In the Presbyterian, Methodist, Roman Catholic, all mainline Protestantism. And it might be because we don't know exactly what Jesus is talking about, but I think it's safe to say that Jesus is saying that some men are born not interested in women. And of course, in his cultural context, he wouldn't say things like, and they have a right to be gay, because a huge understanding of 2,000 years ago, which we no longer have, is that people had to be procreative. They had to make babies, for one, to feed their parents, and also there were land rights. You had to have a son to take over. So the idea of Genesis is be fruitful and multiply was an unquestioned part of every culture. It lived even through the Third Reich of Hitler, who would go to the homes of women who had had 8 boys that all could grow up to be soldiers and defeat those nasty French and bring German domination of the world, that babies are good. And that was even more so 2,000 years ago. Yet Jesus is saying some men aren't going to make babies, and they're born that way. Some are made that way by man. And this is true. There were actually eunuchs who were castrated so that they could protect then the valuables of the wealthy and powerful, the rich or the political, the leaders, the kings of the time. If they were castrated, they were not only seen as no threat sexually to the women, but they were also seen as more reliable and trustworthy, less likely to steal. They were safer than with the gold and jewels of the day. So some are born that way, some are made that way by man, and then it even gets more complicated. Some have made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Let anyone accept this who can. And this is something later St. Paul, who many, by the way, think was gay, and that was the thorn in the flesh he was referring to. I don't know. I didn't meet Paul. But if Paul were gay, that'd be Paul's business. And if he decided not to share it in 10 epistles, that's his right. But this idea that sexuality can be minimized, so we focus on other things, is what happens for a lot of people. And this is all in the context of Matthew 19. Jesus is talking about the possibility to be healthy about our sexuality regardless of what it is, who it's for, and to whom it's directed. And this is what I really would like to talk about today. That little thing that people say, oh, Jesus never mentioned homosexuality. I don't think you could make a more false statement than that, given Matthew 19, verse 12. But to get to a more positive thing, since more people are straight than gay, including the audience of this, but all of us, straight, gay, celibate, active, we can all decide to have perfectly healthy and happy sex lives if we decide to make that a goal and strive for it. And, one of the sad things in my life, I remember at the third seminary I attended in Cambridge, Massachusetts, this person came and had this beautiful list of what healthy sexuality required. I can't find that in a book. I can't remember that person's name. I can't find it online. So I'll give you what I've got from memory. That if we want to have good sex, which is to say godly sex, God created sexuality for our joy and as a beautiful part of creation, and actually you can learn to see God in sexuality if you really get to grad school on the topic. But to get there, there are some guidelines for good sex, and these are the ones I remember from a longer list that I can't find online. 1, sex is for adults. This sounds really obvious, but actually 1 in 5 adult women were sexualized before they're adults is sort of a world estimate, certainly a North American one. And 1 in 38 men is sexualized before being adult. That would include me, by the way. I was sexualized before the age of 3. And so it's a bigger topic for me because part of the healing that comes with that, because it's on our mind and you carry shame and confusion. So to work through that, it's nice to see these guidelines. Had they been followed, I would have had a different life. No bitterness, just sharing the truth here. Sex is for adults. And sex is for consenting adults. Again, it sounds obvious, but we're seeing more and more the value to really pay attention to consent. And it's not once given, had for life. Consenting parties need to consent each and every time. And that includes through the sexuality. Should consent be withdrawn, that's when the sex needs to be paused or reset until full consent and safety is achieved. Here's one that gets a lot of people in trouble. There shouldn't be deception. We could use U.S. presidents for an example, that they're always sleeping with their interns or hiring porn stars. Theoretically, they could have with their interns consenting sex, but what they are doing in almost every case is deceiving their wife. They have made marital contracts, whether it's with Jackie Kennedy or with Hillary Clinton or with Melania Trump or any of the 2 previous wives of the current president. They've made contractual, covenanting things in churches before God, made pledges which are, they're better honored than dishonored. So deception is to be avoided, and breaking of covenant is to be avoided too. Back to the presidents, a big issue there too in healthy sex is there's no power differential. So that 19-year-old Mimi Alford, or whatever her name was, losing her virginity to John F. Kennedy in the in Jackie Kennedy's bedroom could never, of course it was consenting, and in fact at 19 she was an adult. But when there's a power differential, you're the president and the other person is an intern, it just is, as Mr. Clinton's impeachment spoke to, it's impossible to really have any equality in the sexual relationship. So that's why bosses are typically not allowed by their corporations or their little, wherever they work, to sleep with employees. What's that? Don't fish off the company dock. I think I can say that. Those have reason, and the reason is a power differential. That if there's two difference in power, the consent can't truly be genuine. Also, healthy sex has it's protected. Healthy sex only produces children when children are desired by both parties, and this has been discussed in advance. That, oh, we're just going to let our passions move us, and if a baby comes, then that's God's will. That's kind of how it works for squirrels. God gave us a brain and a deductive power and a capacity to communicate at a really high level. And frankly, I'm not so sure dolphins don't get this better than humans. But the idea of protection is protecting against pregnancy, of course STDs as well, but if we're having sexual relations with one partner at a time without deception and honesty, STDs become a far smaller problem because there's a lack of promiscuity and sleeping with the interns and then bringing that back to your wife. Or in one case, interesting, speaking about protection, we know a president recently slept with a porn star, and we know, in fact, that he was not using any form of protection. And so you wonder, anyway, I won't get too into the detail, but that's not ideal. You want to use protection there, keep your wife happy, she might smile more. So the other thing about sex, and this is one of the things I was trying to remember how this seminar, how he said it exactly, but it had to do with this idea that sex is evolving. Sex should, like all our lives, should be moving toward greater wisdom and love and openness. It should always be moving forward, and that was kind of the final, I remember how this guy ended the seminar. Sex should be evolving toward a spirituality where we understand sex as a gift from God, as something that celebrates God, like the Episcopal rite for wedding is gorgeous. We say that the wedding is a reenactment of the union between Christ and Christ's church. Wow. I mean, it's really beautiful. Now, I know a lot of people think, ooh, sex isn't spiritual. We'd kind of lose that nasty fun. If it's lost and something spiritual replaces it, it's never better than that. And that will be true whether we're gay or straight or any form of transgender, queer, bi, or whatever we are. But if we follow these rules and live a more godly sexuality, it will be the pure gift that God made it to be. And I'm going to close with just a sentence from St. Paul in Corinthians. It says, however we may be, let each of you lead the life that the Lord has assigned, to which God has called you. So, in every way, let's lead the life God has called us, and that includes in our sexual lives. All right, thanks. This was long, but big topic. All right.